Picture this. You standing in the mud-soaked streets of London on a grey August morning in 1305, and the air itself seems to vibrate with anticipation. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with something you'd rather not identify, and the crowd around you presses forward with the hungry desperation of wolves scenting blood. Merchants have abandoned their stalls, nobles have descended from their comfortable chambers, and common folk stream in from every corner of the city like ants drawn to honey. But they haven't come for bread or commerce or celebration. They've come to witness something that will sear itself into their memories forever: the systematic destruction of a man who dared to dream the impossible dream of freedom. In the distance, you can hear it approaching, the scraping of wood against stone, the rhythmic clatter of hooves, and beneath it all, a sound that makes your stomach clench with dread. It's the wet, grinding noise of human flesh being dragged across rough cobblestones, leaving behind a crimson trail that tells its own horrific story. It's the wet, grinding noise of human flesh being dragged across rough cobblestones, leaving behind a crimson trail that tells its own horrific story. There, bound naked to a wooden hurdle being pulled behind a horse, is the man they call William Wallace. His skin hangs in ribbons. His back is a checkerboard of wounds that will never heal. What you're about to witness it as the culmination of a conflict that has raged for nearly a decade. A final act of revenge so brutal and calculated that it was designed not merely to end one man as life, but to crush the very soul of a nation. The name William Wallace might not mean much to you now, but by the time we're finished, you'll understand why this single man's death sent shockwaves across medieval Europe, and why his final moments became the stuff of legend and nightmare. But to truly grasp the horror of what's about to unfold in those London streets, we need to journey back 35 years to a Scotland that once knew peace. The year is 1270, and in the rolling green hills of Renfrewshire, a child draws his first breath in a world that seems blessed by divine favor. They name him William, and his father Malcolm is a minor landowner whose greatest ambition is to tend his fields, serve his lord faithfully, and perhaps see his son grow into a man of modest honor. None of them could possibly imagine that this squalling infant will one day have the most powerful monarch in Europe baying for his blood like a rabid hound. Young William grows tall and strong in the shadow of the Scottish Highlands, drinking in the wild beauty of a land that seems untouchable by human ambition. But it's his physical presence that truly sets tongues wagging throughout the countryside. By his 20th year, William Wallace has become something out of legend, a giant among men with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of impossible dreams and hands, powerful enough to make those dreams reality through force of will and strength of arm. The Scotland of William's youth is a realm blessed by what seems like divine providence. King Alexander III rules with wisdom earned through years of careful statecraft, and the land prospers under his steady hand. Markets bustle with merchants from distant shores, harvests overflow the granaries, and the people sleep soundly in their beds, secure in the knowledge that their king watches over them like a benevolent father. Children play in fields that have never known the thunder of foreign hooves, and lovers meet beneath stars that have never looked down upon the smoke of burning villages. But fate, that most capricious of mistresses, has been weaving a different pattern all along. On a storm-lashed night in March 1286, it seems torn from the pages of ancient prophecy, King Alexander rides his horse along the treacherous cliffs near Kinghorn. The wind howls like a banshee, rain lashes the countryside with supernatural fury, and in a moment that will echo through centuries, Scotland's beloved monarch disappears into the darkness. When dawn breaks, they find his broken body at the bottom of the cliff, his neck snapped like a dry twig. With that single fall, Scotland's golden age crumbles to dust and ash. The throne passes to Margaret, known to history as the Maid of Norway, a 3-year-old child who has never set foot on Scottish soil and whose very existence depends on the goodwill of foreign powers. For 4 agonizing years, the realm hangs in precarious balance, ruled by regents who scheme and plot while the kingdom slowly bleeds from 1,000 small wounds. And then, in 1290, as young Margaret finally sets sail to claim her inheritance, fate strikes again with cruel precision. The child queen dies during her voyage, her small body unable to withstand the harsh realities of medieval travel. Scotland finds itself orphaned, without a king, without direction, and about to make a decision that will drench the land in blood for generations yet unborn. Into this chaos steps a figure whose very name will become synonymous with conquest and cruelty, Edward Longshanks, Edward I of England. Standing 6 feet and 2 inches tall, in an age when most men barely reach 5.5 feet, Edward is a warrior king who has spent his entire life perfecting the art of domination. Wales has already felt the crushing weight of his iron fist, its princes dead and its people ground beneath the heel of English ambition. Now his hungry eyes turn north to Scotland, and what he sees makes his pulse quicken with anticipation. Here is a kingdom in turmoil, its nobility fractured and desperate, its people crying out for leadership. When Scottish nobles, terrified of civil war and the chaos it would bring, invite Edward to arbitrate between the competing claimants to their empty throne, they unknowingly invite the wolf into the fold. They think they're seeking a wise judge. Instead, they're handing their kingdom to a predator whose appetite for power knows no bounds. Edward's choice surprises no one who understands the game of medieval politics. He selects John Balliol, a weak man with a legitimate claim, but no backbone, someone Edward believes he can control, like a puppet dancing on strings. But the English king's ambitions extend far beyond simple kingmaking. Almost immediately, the demands begin flowing from London like poison from an infected wound. Scottish nobles must pay homage to Edward directly, bypassing their own king. Scottish legal disputes must be appealed to English courts, undermining centuries of legal tradition. Scottish knights must serve in Edward's foreign wars, bleeding for English ambitions on distant battlefields. Each demand tightens the noose around Scotland's neck, and with each tightening, the proud kingdom gasps for breath. The humiliations pile up like stones on a grave small at first, then growing heavier until they threaten to crush everything beneath their weight. And somewhere in the countryside, a young giant named William Wallace watches these indignities with growing rage. By 1296, even the spineless Balliol can stomach no more degradation. The puppet king, his strings pulled one too many times, attempts something that shocks Edward to his core. He tries to assert Scotland's independence. Balliol forms secret alliances with France, that ancient enemy of English ambition, and in an act of desperate defiance, formally renounces his vassalage to Edward. The message is clear. Scotland will bow no longer. Edward's response comes swift as a striking viper and twice as venomous. His armies pour across the Scottish border like a plague of steel and fire, their banners snapping in the wind like the wings of carrion birds. The first city they encounter is Berwick-upon-Tweed, a prosperous trading port whose only crime is existing on the wrong side of an invisible line drawn by ambitious men. What happens next becomes seared into Scottish memory like a brand pressed into living flesh. The sack of Berwick is methodical, thorough, and absolutely merciless. English soldiers move through the streets like reapers at harvest time, cutting down everything in their path. Women clutching their children, old men begging for mercy, young boys trying to hide in cellars, none are spared the blade. Rivers of blood flow through cobblestone streets that have never known such carnage, and the screaming continues until throats grow too raw to produce sound. When the killing finally stops, 17,000 souls have been fed to Edward's hunger for dominance, their bodies stacked like cordwood in a city that has become a monument to English fury. This is the Scotland that forges William Wallace. This is the crucible of fire and blood, where his resolve hardens into something unbreakable. When Edward strips Balliol of his crown and royal regalia, forcing the broken king to perform public penance in his undergarments, while English nobles laugh and jeer. Young William watches from the shadows. His hands clench into fists as he witnesses this final humiliation of Scottish dignity. When English administrators begin parceling out Scottish lands to their cronies, like party favors treating the proud kingdom as nothing more than spoils of war to be divided, among the victorious something fundamental breaks inside the young giant from Renfrewshire. The spark that ignites Wallace's rebellion comes in the spring of 1297, and like so many moments that reshape history, it begins with something devastatingly personal. The exact details have been lost to the hungry mouth of time. Perhaps it was the brutal murder of his beloved Marion Braveheart by English soldiers, as later ballads claim with voices thick with grief and rage. Perhaps it was witnessing one injustice too many, seeing one more Scottish family torn apart by foreign boots on Scottish soil. But when William Wallace finally draws his sword against William Heselrigg, the English sheriff of Lanark, he crosses a line from which there can never be any retreat. The killing of Heselrigg sends shockwaves rippling throughout occupied Scotland like stones thrown into still water. Here, at last, is a man willing to spill English blood. Here is someone who looks at Edward Longshanks's seemingly invincible war machine and says with quiet conviction, "No more." The response is immediate and electric, spreading through the countryside faster than wildfire. Men begin disappearing from their fields and workshops, slipping away into the ancient forests and mist-shrouded hills to join Wallace's growing band of rebels. But William Wallace proves to be no mere bandit chief leading desperate men in hopeless raids. He possesses something that transforms scattered resistance into organized rebellion, a brilliant, tactical mind coupled with an unshakable belief in Scotland's divine right to freedom. When he speaks to gathered crowds, his voice carries the weight of absolute conviction, each word hammering like a blacksmith's blow against the anvil of destiny. "We fight not for gold or glory," he thunders, his words echoing off stone walls and into the hearts of listening men, "but for freedom alone, which no good man surrenders save with his life." The autumn of 1297 brings Wallace face to face with the full, terrifying might of English military power. At Stirling Bridge, the odds are nothing short of horrific. Perhaps 6,000 Scots against 15,000 English troops, including the finest heavy cavalry in all of Europe. These are knights bred for war, mounted on destriers trained to trample men underfoot, armed with steel that has tasted victory on a dozen battlefields. The English commanders John de Warenne and Hugh Cressingham are so supremely confident of victory that they treat the approaching battle as little more than a training, exercise a chance to water their swords with Scottish blood before the real campaigning begins. They watch with amused contempt from across the river as Wallace and his co-commander, Andrew Moray, position their ragged forces on the high ground of Abbey Craig. The Scots look like what they are, farmers and craftsmen with makeshift weapons, men who learned their fighting skills hunting deer rather than killing knights. Any rational observer would give them no chance whatsoever against the cream of English military might. What follows defies every military manual ever written and overturns centuries of accepted battlefield wisdom. Wallace waits with the patience of a spider in its web, watching as the English begin their crossing of the narrow bridge. The process takes hours. Heavy cavalry requires careful spacing. Infantry must maintain formation. Baggage trains lumber slowly across the slender span. All of it funnels across that single point of stone and timber, creating a long, vulnerable column that stretches like a serpent between two worlds. Any conventional commander would attack immediately, striking while the enemy was divided by the water. But Wallace understands something his enemies do not, that timing in battle is everything, that patience can be deadlier than the sharpest blade. He waits as half the English army crosses, and continues waiting as the numbers grow. His men grow restless, fingers twitching on spear shafts, but their giant leader remains still as carved stone, his eyes fixed on the bridge with the intensity of a hunting hawk. When exactly half the English force is crossed, no more, no less Wallace, gives the signal. The Scots pour down from the heights like an avalanche of righteous fury, their war cries splitting the morning air and echoing off the water below. The English, caught with their forces split by the river and unable to bring their superior numbers to bear, suddenly find themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The narrow bridge becomes a bottleneck of absolute terror as fleeing soldiers trample their own comrades in desperate attempts to escape the Scottish onslaught. Hugh Cressingham, Edward's hated treasurer in Scotland, and a man whose cruelty has earned him enemies in every corner of the occupied kingdom, falls early in the fighting. His death sends a surge of savage joy through the Scottish ranks, and in the gesture that speaks to the depths of their accumulated rage, they flay his corpse like a butchered pig and fashion his skin into belts and curses, grotesque trophies of their impossible victory. When the sun finally sets on Stirling Bridge, the supposedly invincible English army lies shattered like a broken toy, and William Wallace has achieved what every military expert would have sworn was impossible. The giant from Renfrewshire has not merely won a battle. He has torn a hole in the fabric of English dominance that will never fully heal. And so we return to that gray August morning in 1305, to the mud-soaked streets of London, where William Wallace's broken body is about to endure horrors that will echo through 7 centuries of human memory. The execution that follows is designed not merely to end a life, but to destroy a legend. Edward Longshanks believes that by scattering Wallace's remains to the 4 corners of Scotland, he can scatter the dream of freedom itself. But tyrants throughout history have never understood the fundamental truth about martyrdom, that the death of the body can give birth to something far more powerful than any single man. Even as Wallace's head rots on its spike atop London Bridge, something stirs in the Scottish heart. The brutality of his end, rather than crushing resistance, awakens a fury that will burn for generations. Within months, Robert the Bruce declares himself king, and the wars of Scottish independence enter their bloodiest chapter yet. William Wallace never lived to see his dream fulfilled, but his sacrifice planted seeds that would eventually flower into the freedom he died pursuing. In choosing to endure unimaginable agony rather than bow to tyranny, he achieved the only victory that truly matters. He became immortal. Today, more than 700 years later, his name still quickens pulses and stirs hearts, reminding us that some principles are worth any sacrifice, and that the human spirit, once awakened to freedom, can never truly be destroyed. The body they quartered and scattered has long since returned to dust, but the dream burns eternal.